Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
I'm Chris Sun Liu. Part 3 of the Presidency, Presidential Politics. Professor Peterson, an idea that's been proposed is that there is an efficient aspect of government and a dignified aspect of government. What's the distinction between the two?
Well, Walter Bagehot was the man who made that distinction back in the 19th century, and he was talking about the English government. But his idea was that the Queen of England, yes, it was a queen at that time, Queen Victoria, constituted the dignified aspect of government. And that's what citizens really loved. They loved to see the monarchy have their disputes and have their triumphs. And they cared more for a marriage than they did for a cabinet. And the efficient aspect of government, the prime minister working at 10 Downing Street, this tiny little building, could do whatever he wanted and nobody paid much attention to it. So there was the dignified aspect of government and the efficient aspect, and the dignified was probably almost as important as the efficient side, because dignified kept the public on the side of good government.
In England, those two aspects of government are clearly separate, but also interconnected. What do we have as a system in the United States?
Well, the odd thing is that we have a president who is both. The president is both the key to the dignified aspect of government and the key to the efficient aspect. There's a complete overlap. And presidents try to use the dignified aspect to help them govern effectively. They play the role of the head of state. If the Queen of England comes to the United States, she will meet the president, and they will meet on equal terms because they are both heads of state. So this is a powerful political weapon that U.S. presidents can mobilize. They can go to official functions, they can review the military, they can give speeches on behalf of the country as a whole. So the president has a national constituency, and this is not only because he's part of the dignified aspect of government, but also because he is elected by all the people. He is, apart from the vice president, the only individual who has been elected by everyone. Anybody else is speaking only for a part of the United States. So as President Obama has said, I'm the adult in the room. The rest are children, he implies. They don't have the same set of responsibilities that I have. They don't have the dignified aspect of government working on their behalf.
Now, does the president truly answer to just his one national constituency?
Well, in fact, the president has a partisan constituency as well as a national constituency. The president has to worry about the political needs of his party. He has to raise money for the party. He has to mobilize support for congressional elections when he's not running for office. And he has to campaign for his partisans if he's going to get a strong Congress that will back him. So presidents constantly have to balance their national constituency against their partisan constituency. Here's an example of the way it can work. If a president is running in a primary, or if candidates who are supporting the president are running in a primary, they have to win that primary, and they have to get the support of half of the voters who are on the left side of the political distribution of opinion, if they're a Democrat, or the half that are on the right side if they're in the Republican primary. And so the people who vote in these primaries are not the whole public, but just half of the public, and sometimes even less than that. And so the decisions that are made in these primary elections are determined by the most extreme elements in the party. Not always, but more often than many political leaders would like to see it. So the national constituency, however, is shaped very much by the middle road position. So a president is constantly trying to balance the middle of the road position that is important for governing the country as a whole against the partisan concerns of his particular party.
Let's now discuss presidential popularity. When during a president's term is he or she the most popular, and how does popularity change over time?
It's interesting to see how steady is the decline in presidential popularity over the course of the first term in office. What you see in this slide is a summation of all presidencies since World War II, except for the Bush and the Obama administrations. And you can see that every president has suffered a steady decline from the first year in office down to the third year in office, with some recovery in the fourth year just before re-election time. So it's fortunate they had that recovery in that fourth year, or they would never get reelected. But now, if you look at the two recent presidencies, George Bush and Barack Obama, you'll see in more detail that this phenomenon is still going on. Now, there is the foreign policy exception. You have, in the case of George Bush there, that huge increase in popularity. The blue line jumps way up and the red line falls dramatically at the very beginning of the Bush presidency, and that's 9/11, because the foreign policy crisis will boost a president's popularity temporarily. But then it's a steady decline downward all the way, so that 6 years into that term of office, by August of the sixth year, President Bush has the support of only 40% of the voters. And the opposition, that red line, is steadily climbing, so that the majority is disapproving of the performance of the president. Now you can see the same line exists for Barack Obama. Doesn't look quite the same on these graphs because the left-hand bar is a little different. But the 6 years into Barack Obama's term in office, you have the same 40% level by August of that year. And it's been a pretty steady decline for President Obama as well, but there's this jump up in support just before re-election. That fourth year, he did see a gain in popularity before the decline continues after that point. So both of these presidents have seen the steady decline that is typical of presidents in the post-war period.
That's interesting. Why does this erosion of popularity happen so steadily and so predictably?
Well, you'd think presidents would do what's popular, and therefore they would keep their popularity. But there's a theory out there called the coalition of minority theory, which says that every time the president makes a decision, somebody's unhappy. And different people are unhappy with different things, but all feel very intensely about the things they dislike. So all the time, the president is losing some small minority of the population. He may be doing what the majority wants, but the minority keeps growing, and a coalition of these minorities finally begins to threaten the president's popularity. Now, it's also true that the president can lose popularity because of the state of the economy, and we'll be talking about that later. But the coalition of minorities probably works inexorably, even when the economy isn't that bad.
To conclude this lecture, Professor Peterson, what makes for a great president?
Presidents would love to know what they can do to become a great president. And the answer to that, according to one scholar, is that the president can't do anything about it. It's all a matter of what the president inherits. So we love George Washington because of the failures of the Articles of Confederation. If you have a terrible event before you, you can become a great president. So we all think George Washington was great. And then we have John Adams, who was a failure as president. Thomas Jefferson becomes a great president. And then John Quincy Adams, another Harvard grad, also proves to be a failure as president, unfortunately, and is replaced by Andrew Jackson, who is thought to be one of our great presidents, one of our powerful presidents. Or James Buchanan, the person who was in power when the Civil War is about to break out, replaced by Abraham Lincoln. Or Herbert Hoover, replaced by the great President Franklin Roosevelt. Or Jimmy Carter, replaced by the strong, many people think, great President Ronald Reagan. So we come down to George Bush. Was he a failure? Many people think he was. Was he replaced by a great president, Barack Obama? Many people think he is. But we're not so sure yet. History has yet to pronounce.
And what are the takeaways on presidential power?
Well, the takeaway might be that we will not have any more great presidents because the expectations for a president are so tremendous in the 21st century that they cannot live up to those expectations. And public discontent rises so rapidly because of the power of the media and rapid communications. So presidents have more power than ever before, and presidents are blamed for just about everything, more than ever before. That's the irony of the modern presidency.
The president shares power with Congress. And in the next lecture, we're going to look at congressional decision making.